Those who are able to see beyond the shadows and lies of their culture will never be understood, let alone believed, by the masses. Plato. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is an interview with Devin Madgy of Flat Earth Paradise. It's awesome for him to join me, and we really don't have a time limit for this interview, which is awesome. So, hi, Devin.
Hey there. How's it going?
Great. And thank you for coming in. And what's really weird is you mentioned that you usually don't have interviews, like collaborations with these. It's like, I don't understand why. I feel like you've got such great, not just you just have good information and insight. And I can understand where some people might be coming from, people I've talked with before. But for me, it's a different way of not even thinking. It's maybe imagining, but like what I like to do is I do my own research, my own thinking, whatever it is, my own experiences, and then I try to find other people who come up with a similar outcome, and then I find someone like you where you do have that similar outcome, and it's like, how did you get to the similar outcome as me? I don't think you went through the same way, same methods, etc. So at least now, after watching probably 10s, 20s, 30s hours of your videos, so I see a lot of the similarities where I finally got to where I'm at now as far as what I realized. But then now it's like, how did you get there? So
we're all connected by this etheric field, and truth is eternal. So in the age of Pisces, everybody looked upon truth and wisdom as something that was to be found in a book, or something you'd have to join maybe a mystery school or a secret society to uncover. But times are very different. Things are not as occulted as they once were. There is some, for lack of a better term, thread which has been weaving itself into reality, allowing people to tap into their own intuition, and instead of simply being a disciple of a specific movement or a book or something like that, we're now able to move out of the restraints of dogma and, tap into what do I really know as the truth.
Yeah. Can you give us a breakdown of how you got out of the indoctrination of the globe Earth model into flat Earth, into the things that you've looked into maybe before or after you've discovered a lot of things? I feel it as more of a peeling of the layers of an onion. I still have layers of the onion I still need to peel away, but that's just part of my process. I'm just down that journey. I want to know. I would love for you to share your journey as well.
I think most of us have been on a pretty tumultuous journey, like getting to the point where you have released all of the attachments to the mainstream narratives, and all of these archetypes were fed. It's not necessarily always an easy process. So my process started when I was a teenager. I, of course, looked into all of the Zeitgeist movies and the 9/11 conspiracies, and everything was being revealed in a very slow fashion. So at first, the Truther movement was all about how the government is lying to us, and maybe they're lying to us about UFOs, about aliens. They're obviously lying to us about the monetary system, how politics actually works, and why there is a system which seems to be oppressive. And so the truther movement was founded on that realization that there was something wrong with the system I'm in. And then over time, exponentially, this has just grown into merging what we would call conspiracy theories with esoteric concepts, and realizing that a lot of these ideas about a shadow force in the government, a dark cabal, they actually work in tandem with going within and discovering, well, if everything outside of me is an illusion, or at the very least is not how I was fed, then maybe I can go within and find a world untapped into. So the paradoxical reality about this oppressive force, and we'll talk about it because it is not at all what we think it is. The paradoxical reality is that it's designed so we can go within. So any fire that you immerse yourself in, it actually doesn't burn you. It actually burns off what you don't need. And this is why the awakening, or the ascensional process, as many people call it, is happening right now. Because after we've gone without and realized so much deception, we can protest, we can petition, this and that. But at the end of that rope, we realize we actually go within to find the truth. And so I've taken a similar journey as you probably have, and many others on this so-called train. And I would say it's taken sacrifice and a lot of disconnection from just what the mainstream is doing and what people are spending their time doing. Time is energy, and what we fill our minds with in time, or how we act within time, what our intention is emitting back to us exactly what we're putting in. Obviously, energy in, energy out. So I wouldn't say I'm unique. All of us are able to tap into what we're tapping into simply because of this sacrifice.
Yep. Like for me, a lot of the things that I look into, it's always been a logical process. It's always been an investigative process. I use what the educational system was taught to me in order for me to formulate my end results, as far as looking into things. And the way I would do it typically is just looking into the mainstream narrative, the official statements and things like that, and just break it down. Are they telling the truth? Is everything pretty much 100% as they have stated it is? And then of course I don't find it that way. And then whether we're going, and that was one of the processes of me pretty much getting out of the globe earth narrative and into just pretty much, to simply put it, it's most likely a flat earth than a globe earth. And if it's a flat earth, there's a center, the North Pole, magnetic North Pole, which they've never ever videotaped. They've been to the moon five out of 5 times and landed on it. Never showed any pictures or videos of them going to the magnetic North Pole. And that's like one of the things that they as in the controllers of the masses, whatever it is, they never seem to, they always seem to hide things out in the open. But this is one thing that they just plainly hide, and just say it's something else. But the thing is, I can't explain my experiences, especially with my experiences with ayahuasca, which I took twice, and my experiences I had there. I can't explain that scientifically. I can't validate it. It's just my experience. It's just an inward journey, which the only thing I could tell people is, if you take ayahuasca and that experience, you're going to meet Mother. You're going to experience the humbleness. She's going to tell you who you are. She's going to communicate you with whatever language you have, and she's going to protect you that first time. And then each time that you take it is going to be a lesson, and it's very hard lessons. I'm I'm not even sure if I'm ready for the next step into taking that journey, but I feel like I have to be. And so it's getting that inward journey to just kind of propel you to understanding the outward. It's weird. It's weird. It's just weird, just because it's not something that we would typically experience, and it's something that the mainstream, the establishment, they wouldn't even want you to even try, let alone talk about. And so, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts about that. Have you ever tried ayahuasca? Has it always been through meditation? Because I've tried meditation. It's different for me when I don't get the same experiences as the ayahuasca experiences with just meditation for me.
You know, I've had sacred experiences on ayahuasca. I've had sacred experiences completely sober, and those were actually my most powerful ones. Yeah, I've experimented with psilocybin, and what I've extracted is, you know, every experience is unique, and you are given what you require when you require it. And this could be stone sober, this could be when you're at a very low point, or this could be when you decide to embark on an ayahuasca trip or ceremony. But ultimately, every experience is divine, and that is what has been cut out of this realm. Every single encounter, every realization, every supposed setback, every peak and trough is actually you communing with yourself in a process of purging. And I say that only because this place we're in is what Dante referred to as purgatory. Purgatory, this is the toroidal field. The toroidal field is what emerges from what we would call the magnetic North Pole. And as I've been explaining, especially in my recent videos, this net of magnetics is simply that. It is a net here to catch all of our dualistic manifestations. And when I say our, I do not mean everybody here who has a body. Because just because somebody talks, moves, and seems to have a history with continuity does not mean they exist outside of this realm. So this is where we get to the idea of the 144,000 spoken of in the book of Revelation. And this number is not simply a number that the Christians wrote down. This number goes way back. If you look at the word magnetics in reverse gematria, magnetic equals 144. What else equals 144? Light, time, and feminine. And I would say all of these concepts fuse together to tell us where we are, because time is very distinct to what we would call the third dimension where we are, because time has a beginning and an end, has a this and a that. You're born, you grow, and then you slowly decay, no matter how healthy you are in this realm, and then you are dead. And then we have been on the cycle of samsara, or reincarnation. And this process seems very elusive to many of us, because while we might understand it, there's very few memories, if any memories at all, that carry over from these past existences. And why is that? Well, it's because the 144,000, which we will definitely get more into, they have literally projected themselves from a higher form, a higher dimension, if you will. And these forms, which are shadow projections, have been going round and round on the toroidal wheel of time through many, many incarnations as a process to catch all of the manifestations which the tension between good and evil creates. And this, I find, a realization that not many people can really experience, because the narrative in the truther community, the most common narrative, is that there is a dark cabal, an evil force, maybe some kind of demonic presence that is creating a system of control and of energy extraction. And why wouldn't that be the case? I mean, everywhere we look, everything is the inversion of truth. It's like if you were to make a place where everything is the opposite as it should function, you would create what we have called Earth. There's destruction, there's turmoil, inner and outer, there's manipulation everywhere we go. I mean, GMOs, chemtrails, this and that. So how on earth can I say all of this is actually a facade here to reflect back to us a decision a finite number of beings made? Well, it's because nothing is as it seems. And so once again, Dante called this purgatory, and Mount Purgatorio is seen as a bunch of concentric rings which end at the top ring, which is Eden, or the earthly paradise. Now, I drew the connection that if you actually look at this from an aerial perspective, the center is the earthly paradise. And of course, Purgatoria, the Latin form of purgatory, equals 144 in gematria. You cannot make this stuff up. You cannot connect all of this, even if you're some dark force trying to fool truthers or something like that. This is a conglomeration of messages because the universe runs on a mechanism of synchronicity, not determining that something is something because you have marked it as such. And so the center of the toroidal field, what we would call the magnetic North Pole, that is where the aurora borealis comes out from. This is a primarily emerald light, which we've been told is a bunch of charged particles in the atmosphere. And that's all it is. There's nothing to see here.
Yeah, I've noticed a couple of people always trying to point out the electric universe, that idea. And of course, I don't know who they are. They don't show their faces. They don't show their names. But they seem to be pushing that. One thing that got to me when you mentioned the number 144, 144,000, it all permeates throughout different types of stories, scripture, mythology. I think you also mentioned that it was Sophia Lucifer that adds up to 144 as well.
Lucifer Lilith.
Oh, Lucifer Lilith
equals 144, and yeah, Lilith is a different version of the story of Sophia leaving what we would call the heavens and basically becoming the mother of demons or the mother of shadows.
Yeah.
But Lucifer, Lilith, it seems like these are two characters, but they're really not. You know, we hear of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. There's many movies with the name of Lucy. When we can step out of a limited perspective, which says one thing can only be one thing, then we can realize this mother goddess has thousands of names. I mean, Persephone, Kali, Shakti, Chaos, Sophia, Lucifer, Lilith. Yep. There's so many names.
So one of the things I was wondering is 72 is a pretty big number. As far as a lot of stories go, 72 can be attributed to the number of demons, in some instances, number of angels, but also whether you get into the Mayan story or well, not just the Mayan story, the Mayan calendar, the system, and then also the Egyptian story of why we have 365 days. It's with Thoth Thoth, taking away the moon's energy, 1/72 of the moon's brightness. But 72 plus 72 is 144, and if you add those two, the Lilith, sorry, that gets 144. Is that part of just the getting the duality aspect into a singularity form, or what do you think about it?
Exactly. Yeah, because you just mentioned 72 angels is referenced in mythology and religion, but then again, we also hear about like the 72 demons of Solomon in Solomon's Goetia. And if we look back at the original story of angels versus demons in the Judeo-Christian texts, we find, well, demons actually began as angels, like they're fallen angels. I mean, Lucifer, who is usually called Satan in modern times, he began as one of God's most beautiful. So he fell, or Sophia fell. Sophia fled from the pleroma to create matter. So what does all of this mean? And what I'm trying to say is labeling things as good and evil, righteous or damned, pure or impure, that is a false dichotomy. And it is this very dichotomy which the field of magnetics is meant to display. And if you think about it, you can only know thyself through knowing what you are not. And you intuitively know this because that's how you have come to this place in truth. I mean, 10 years ago, I can speak for all of us. All of this gnosis was not out in the open. What we were experiencing back then was a fraction of the depth of wisdom we are now. And why is that? Well, like we began this conversation, when you were reflected back supposed wrongdoings, or rather an inverted consciousness showing everything that a master-slave mentality produces, then ultimately that forces you to go within. That forces you to realize that is not what I want to be. That is not how I want to act. And it's actually brilliant because we are shown in real time, day after day, even right now, how this consciousness pervades and destroys. You know, and it's not necessarily about separating yourself from others in a hierarchy. Like, I would never say I am worth more than you because you are buying into all of these false concepts. But rather, there's a form of resilience I find from observing that inversion, because you know what you put in, you get out. And if you're attaching yourself to all of these narratives, then you end up kind of like a robot, kind of like an AI receiver, right? Mm-hmm. And this begs the question, why aren't people waking up? You know, how come my friends, how come my family won't see the same things I'm seeing? How come you might have a great conversation with a relative, and yet a few days down the line, it's like you didn't even say anything. It's like they completely forgot about it. So what's the deal? And the deal is not everyone here even has the capacity to wake up, because those who are waking up are literally projections into a sort of virtual reality, a sort of simulation. And I know you're into science. Physics over the past 20 years has been coming out with so much material on how, you know, reality actually is a projection from that which is observing it. So Tom Campbell, who is one of like the leading quantum physicists when it comes to talking about this being a simulation of sorts, he answers that question: if a tree falls down in a forest and there's nobody to hear it, then does it make a sound? And the answer is, if there is no conscious observer of reality, reality does not render, just like a video game. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be this mono idea within this conversation of being in a simulation that, oh, well, this means we're in a computer, right? Or this means we're the playthings of some extraterrestrial or demonic force. But ladies and gentlemen, I think we should step back and get out of polarity and accusation and feeling like we're the victim of some force out there, because again, you wouldn't find this unity if you were not reflected what you aren't. And so what's actually happening is we're being prepared to be rebirthed rather, at the 0 point. And the aurora borealis, once again, is the emerald light that comes from the center. This is the Emerald City. Why is that the same color as the heart chakra? Well, it is one in the same. At the north, that light is a placeholder for the inevitable return of the 144,000 after all the dualistic manifestations are caught on the net. And this is the ascension, or the return to Eden, or the justice that Jesus Christ will give at the end of days. But once again, most people are looking at this from the perspective that that divine intervention is coming here to smite all that is wrong. But if all that is wrong is temporary, is a part of this overlay on earth, then I'm saying they don't even exist, and just because your eyes are seeing it does not mean they are eternal. And so this has been shown in many, many movies. And the reason I bring this up is because it's so blatant. And this is not Hollywood trying to mock us or anything. These movies are literal emanations from this mother goddess. And I know that sounds ridiculous. And I know you're probably thinking, well, there's credits. There's obviously thousands of people who work on this movie, but it's a trick. The mama plays tricks in the Matrix. So the greatest example that I've seen in movies was that recent Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle movie. There are a bunch of teenagers in high school who are fighting. They're really not getting along. So they get sucked into a video game by an emerald light into Jumanji, where they inhabit specific avatars. They're surrounded by non-player characters who appear real but are a part of the game. And there is a dark force who has stolen the emerald the emerald eye of the Jaguar. So we get to the end of the movie. They actually successfully replace the emerald eye of the Jaguar, and you see the aurora borealis emanate, dissolve all of the dark forces, and then essentially the characters return back to their original bodies in high school. But now they have learned such a valuable lesson, and now they're actually all best friends, and they're very well equipped to go about their lives. So this is exactly what's happening. And it sounds kind of punitive, right? Like, oh, we weren't getting along, or we were fighting, so we had to get sucked into a game of toroidal torment. But it's not a game imposed by an external force or even by a mother goddess, because when consciousness expresses something, it automatically manifests. There's this idea that in order to make something happen, you must use left-brained reasoning and decide it's going to happen. So if I want to write a book, I have to physically do it, or else it's not going to be written. If I want to make a sandwich, I have to get up, get bread, etc. But when we're talking about reality itself, the creation and the creator are tied in an infinite loop without separation. So what you're experiencing is always emitted from you, even though it might seem to have independent continuity. And I liken this to a dream. When you're in a dream at night, the reality you're observing is produced by you. That is your sub and unconscious materializing as an environment, and you can fly, or maybe there's a scary person chasing you, or you're hanging out with your friends in the clouds. I don't know. Like, dreams are weird, but all of the people in your dreams are actually manifestations of yourself. But in your dream, it's not like before your dream you determine, okay, I'm going to be in the clouds with my friends, there's going to be a tea party. No, it just happens. So obviously there was an imbalance at the 0 point. Obviously, this toroidal field had to manifest and hold down that emerald energy. And that's how I see the toroidal field. It's compressing this emerald energy. And that tells me this is a very safe holding space, because we're here and we're allowed to experiment with rage and accusation and aggression and feelings of victimhood and so on and so forth. And therefore, after we're done fleshing out all of those unpleasant emotions and experiences, which ultimately strengthen us, then we return back to the 0 point like a yo-yo.
One of the things that you mentioned just made me think about how when I'm watching movies and shows and things like that, when you watch it the first time, you just see the exoteric part. Then when you start understanding the occult, the hidden meanings behind things, or the esoteric, is you watch the second time, it's different. You see all these things, and it's easy to spot them. And I always wondered, why is it so easy to spot them? I mean, if they wanted this hidden, and they would probably make sure people wouldn't figure out the hidden meanings behind things and all of this, but it's out there. Either they make a mistake, and it's like, what's the point of them to keep revealing all these things to people who've started to understand the hidden meanings behind things, and just show it out in plain sight in these movies? It feels like a mistake, but I think that explanation kind of explains quite a bit. I feel like we might be getting ahead of a lot of people who might be watching this, but again, I think this isn't really meant for the masses. This is really meant for the people who are in this particular moment of what's occurring. And when I talk about how there's more possibilities people may not have thought of, for example, we start to get into a higher level of the allegory of Plato's cave, which we mentioned just briefly before this interview, and how in like we, as third-dimensional objects, beings in this dimension, we when light casts upon us, we emit two-dimensional shadows. And so the allegory of Plato's cave is someone who's only seen those shadows inside a cave from a candlelight, and just everyone pretty much that are held there are slaves looking at that cave wall and things passing. They're just going, hey, that's this is that. They formulate names for it. And then finally one of them gets free, sees that, hey, what we were looking at were just shadows. And then he actually sees the third dimensional objects. Then he leaves the cave and says, oh my goodness, there's actually sunlight from the sun and this big tree and all this other stuff. So he goes back down, talks to all the people who are the slaves within the cave, and they just won't believe him. They think he's crazy. And it's like, you say one more thing, we're not going to talk to you ever again, type of thing. And it feels that way with the way we are. At least for me, it's, if I try to talk to anybody that's in the fully immersed in the materialistic, they're gonna just think I'm crazy. They just don't want me even talking about it. But then I also mentioned we could be three-dimensional shadows of a higher dimension, although it's a little bit weird because shadows don't have a say in what occurs. But maybe we just think that we have free will or something like that, because I mean, how would we really know? I mean, all this could have been scripted out and we're just following the script, just like shadows do when light casts upon us and things like that. So what are your thoughts about any of that?
I would say I agree with you. What's presented here when we speak about these concepts like free will is always dualistic judgments. So free will to most people, if that's abolished, it feels evil or it feels wrong. Most people say, you know, of course I have free will. If I don't, does that mean I'm a plaything of some other force? If I'm not in control of my life, then what are you trying to tell me, right? But the term free will is actually a paradox in itself. A will is something you write before death. So you can't be free when you're imposing a will. I always explain the law, which is an abbreviation I created, love above will. Because when we are trying to determine how reality functions by separating something, zeroing in on it, and then impeding that creation to others, or you know, etc., etc., we're not trusting that love is the answer. And through maintaining love, there is nothing to do, there's nothing to be done, and there is nothing to achieve other than that which flows naturally. So I'm not at all saying you should just sit there and meditate and then reality will unfold to you. What I'm saying is the type of consciousness we've seen has been a scarcity consciousness, which says, if I don't get up in the morning and go to a job, basically be a slave, if I don't, you know, be snappy with my time, I will lose out on opportunities, and therefore my reality will just be in the shitter. And this is indeed a perversion. This is a beginning and an end. This is a cycle. And a cycle maintains that there is a destination after the initial embarking. And so what you just said, we embarked on this timeline because it has an end. And that's why Eden, it has all of the letters for end. And what you also mentioned is that we're higher dimensional beings who have projected these shadow forms. Now, I actually feel quite alone in the ascensional community when I say this is automatic. Like, we're already at what we would call the Garden of Eden. And most people know this because if God or Source breaks off and fragments itself and fractalizes itself into individuated consciousness, then of course, even down here in this very dense form, we're obviously connected to the entire cosmos already. So this isn't a process of determining the truth. This is just orchestrated by the higher you, the higher self, if you will. So the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside and it looks like fate. So if an individual remains unknown about what's unresolved and what's lurking in the shadows, then the external must act out this conflict. And it's going to seem like you're torn in opposing halves. You know, it's going to seem like there's a shadow force out there. But for many of us who have been awake for quite some time, some of us have had sleep paralysis, or what we would observe as demons or mind parasites. And yet, after we resolve what's within, look, no more sleep paralysis. Like, I'll give you my example. I used to be a traditional Gnostic where I bought into the archons as a separate force. And I constantly would feel attacked. Years ago, I would constantly feel like there was something manipulating my state of mind at particular moments in time. But the years fast forward, and look, where's the shadows? Where are they? Where's the mind parasites? You know, so in the YouTube comments, I can always tell when somebody is looking at things through that perspective of fear, because they're saying, you know, I like what you're saying, but you have to understand, we are the slaves, and the Anunnaki millions of years ago divided our DNA and this and that, and that's why we're the slave race, and everything is poisonous and this and that. And my response is, yeah, this is Shadowland. Yeah, these realizations, that's exactly why you're here, to feel afraid, to feel disempowered. Because when we are finally birthed out of this womb of the mother goddess, then we'll actually be equipped to live out the matrix as it was intended. And I've said this many times, but matrix comes from the old French word for womb. And that comes from the Latin word for mother, which is mater. So we have the connection between matter. What's the matter? The matter's the matter. Matter, womb, and mother. So what's going on? And this is something I come up with as a theory. When you have a baby in this world, you are responsible for it. Not even only legally, just you have created this, so now you must infuse it with what it needs to start walking and eating and being a functioning human being. But what about in the higher realms? Do entities have etheric sex, and what's the birthing process like? Well, it's an emanation. So when you're floating about in the 8th dimension or whatever, and you want to pull something out of you to create another being, that's what you're doing. You're emanating a part of yourself which materializes, and it gains its own consciousness. And again, when we think of source dividing into many, that's the only way things actually can ever work. So after that happens, does the 8th dimensional entity just fly away? Well, maybe in some instances, but when we're talking about Lilith or Sophia, this mother goddess emanated 144,000 beings, and we have been cultivated in this womb. And it sounds very, very just violent, right? That we have been in some microcosmic womb of some higher dimensional being who shadow projected herself, but we are about to get out of this misery through this birthing process. But that's what it appears to me. We're actually being prepared to live out a true non-dual existence, because outside of the 3rd dimension and this Metatronic overlay, which is another name for this magnetic field, outside of it, there is no tension between good and evil. In fact, most of the universe is so creative, so benevolent, so fun, so whimsical, very cartoonish even. So I have a theory that all emanations from higher beings have to go through this process. So you start out maybe in the 1st dimension, you end up in the 2nd. I could not even tell you what those look like. They're probably very hellish and boring. And then all of a sudden you're on the wheel of samsara in the 3rd dimension. And it makes sense that we would get this preliminary experience before having the ability to instantly manifest, right? Because if we go from the 2nd to the 5th, then, oh my God, we're releasing all of these horrible worlds, and we don't know how to control it because we still have or would have shadows to purge. So that's just a theory, but I have a feeling that what we call the 144,000, in terms of the physical, we are very young souls, and this birthing process is only for our benefit. And the roof is on fire, right? The party is just getting started. I have a video on the Notre Dame fire.
Yep, I watched that.
And Notre Dame literally can be translated as Our Lady at the North. Notre is an anagram for north, and Norte, which in 10 languages means north. And Dame, of course, is mother or Our Lady. So Our Lady at the North is on fire. Notre Dame, N equals 14, D equals 4. 144. You cannot make this stuff up. And the roof was on fire. So I started to listen to that 80s dance room chant, the roof is on fire. And that always means the party is just getting started. And then, of course, I went, as you saw, to the Alicia Keys music video because I was thinking of Girl on Fire. Yeah. And what do you know? She is immersed in this emerald green light.
Yeah.
So these messages seem to be so synchronized that most of them probably are under our true ability to decode it, but the specifics don't matter.
Yeah. And I'll just harken back a little bit towards my first ayahuasca experience and the shadows, how well actually before that, just the pain that mother feels, at least that's what we feel. What is that exactly? Why do we feel the mother's pain? Is she a part of this, that as far as a victim or experience, or is there something more to that pain that she feels? And then the second one is, I will just agree, in that ayahuasca experience, I saw shadows. Shadows could manifest, but they can't do anything. And so the fear was just gone because I just laugh at the shadows. It's just like, the shadows. Why am I afraid of a shadow? It's just a shadow. Shadow can't do anything, right? And so that was just amazing. And I am now at this point, or since then, it's like I do feel that weird sense of fear sometimes, just what we have, but I'm not afraid to face it because I feel as though it's just a shadow. I'm more afraid. If I'm afraid of a shadow, then I can't confront the real things that I experience. I mean, a shadow isn't real. It's just the manifestation of something that we conjure up or is conjured up for us. And so if we're afraid of that, we're not going to be brave enough to actually confront these things that aren't shadows. And that's just kind of my feeling or interpretation of it. But sorry, I want you to keep
brilliant, brother. No, I fully agree with everything you just said. You just said that very eloquently. Yeah, because shadows can only display shame and fear and all of those bully type projections, right? Like, we've all had bullies or narcissists in our lives who, we do something wrong and they're trying to just instill this emotion of fear. But fear itself is non-existent. So all of these shadows, like you just said, they actually don't exist. They're here just to display what we're not. And again, like, if you're not aware of these shadows, how can you flesh them out? Because obviously you have had shadows, and you just talked about the mother goddess experiencing this and her turmoil trickling down and being felt by all of us. Now, I don't talk about this much. I don't think I've ever spoken of it on my main channel. I had a direct experience during sun gazing where the aurora borealis projected into my sphere of consciousness for an entire week. And I communed with this very feminine, motherly force. And the main thing she told me was, I know what you've been going through because I've been going through the same thing. All of your story is my story, And again, when we can step into a higher dimensional perspective, you can be many things at once. You can have various experiences all at the same time. It's actually only here where multitasking is confusing and a bitch. So the mother goddess has carried us all through this and trickled down her dualism, and we have been the ones to flesh it out on behalf of her. But she has not had a very pleasant experience. It hasn't been a walk in the park for any entity involved in this experience.
Yeah, I always felt as though we were here because we volunteered during the ayahuasca experience. We were here because we wanted to be here. It wasn't because we were just randomly chosen or whatever. It's just that realization, and the role that we have is, it's hard to remember. Again, I feel like it's hard to explain these sometimes, but if we're coming from a higher dimension, we can't understand that dimensional part. We can only understand what we can understand here in this dimension. So a lot of the things that we might know about outside of this, it's just, we just can't fathom it here. So we're limited in our ultimate knowledge of what we may have had in just a projection. Just I don't know how to explain it anything better than that. And when we get down to it, is Gnosticism in itself is a big, it's huge. It's bigger than I thought it was. And that was one of the things that I looked into a lot, and it's just the different stories that were told as far as just variations of the Abrahamic scripture. And the part where there are different ideas, like different creation stories. So it's hard to know which one, but there's one where someone was saying that, and I don't know where that reference was that Lucifer was, after God, the source created humankind, is that just the humankinds were instilled with the God essence of creation and all of that, and one of the angels, Lucifer, didn't want to worship humankind. He just wants to worship the source, the creator, and thus that's why there was this fallout. So I thought that was an interesting story. Other stories are that Sophia creates creates the demiurge, and the demiurge creates the material world, and thinks, okay, I'm the first one here and I can do all these things. I must be God. I must be the creator. But then in his hubris, he creates, he says to all the angels he created, or demons, whatever, I forget which part, but he says, hey, if there is a God more powerful, or creator more powerful than me, then let that God creator manifest in front of me. And it did. So the creator manifested in front of the demiurge. All the angels, demons that he created weren't able to see it, but of course Sophia was able to. And the reason why the demiurge was created was Sophia created something without the consent of the creator source. And what was in that image, the apparition that came before the demiurge, was just human projection, just a perfect human. And after that experience, the demiurge, I think, was angry or something, and decided to one up the creator that appeared before him and created humans in that same image. So therefore, if I create that human image and I can control it, then I am the creator of that as well. But then Sophia was going, there's something wrong with that thought, but we're going to let you keep doing that. So it's very interesting creation stories. But then again, a lot of these things, I don't know whether if it's been like just part of a made up story or lie or whatever, but it's just something that we just know as a story that's interesting than the most commonly given stories, which is the Abrahamic scriptures. And
right, the very dry conceptualization of like a patriarchal God who demands a specific type of worship or admiration, and he will then grant your ascension to heaven, which, by the way, the mainstream narrative of heaven is so dry and lifeless. Like, the angels will bow at the throne of God and blow their trumpets. Like, to me, that seems very void of creativity. Now, when we're talking about the demiurge, again, I find myself a little alone in this interpretation because the demiurge comes from Sophia. This is Sophia's child. This is Sophia's shadow. And thus, all of the archons which sprung through Yaldabaoth, or the demiurge, that uh, snake being with a lion's head, all of that are what we would call the 72 demons, which Sophia is trying to get rid of. So the same way that, let's say you develop an addiction, a food addiction, an emotional addiction, drug addiction, these addictions end up having like a life of their own. So addicts oftentimes refer to themselves as like having this inner demon, or the addict within, after a few months of sobriety, like forced me to appease my addiction. Well, what is this? Well, it's because as within, so without. What is experienced as a force that wants to eat you alive, it is neither here or there. It is neither you or other. It ends up displaying itself between that gap between the self and the other. So the demiurge, and thus all of matter, because matter is the demiurge. Matter is the demiurge. All of this matter is, exactly what we're talking about. It's here as a function to resolve. Like, its very purpose is to resolve itself. The idea that this material plane is going to continue with all of its corruption because, well, we destroyed the forest, we polluted the rivers, politicians basically filed down any sort of justice within the mainstream system. So I guess we're fucked, right? And what I say is, if everything here was actually operating in a truly free mechanism, then none of us would have this opportunity to even be talking about this wisdom.
Mm-hmm. And one of my thoughts, and these are just thoughts, I like having thoughts and sharing them. People may not like me, but about them. But you know how we grow up as children. Children grow up to become adults, and as adults, we want our children to become adults. And if there is a creative source that are our parents in a way, just like Sophia might be regarded as our mother, and then we also have a point when we become adults is to become more like the parents of us as adults. So as just like we grow, we help our children grow up to become adults, and we're pretty much at that point we just let go because we understand that they have their own life to lead. But then at that point we still have more growing to do. I think there's a third process where I know people, like, I was even against the idea of becoming not a god or whatever, but it's we're not trying to become a god as like we want to be like the god of the Abrahamic whatever, or just be some superpower. It's just that we have to grow past our conscious selves to what any type of parent of creation, if we are a creation of a higher dimension being, we have to learn how to become that, how to grow up past our human adulthood to the next step. And it's just like when you were watching a movie for the first time, you got the what is it, exoteric, and then you got the esoteric when you watch it the second time. There might even be a third time when you understand everything and you watch everything again, you realize how it fits in. When you watch it the second time with the esoteric meanings, you're just mind blown. But to think about it, that you watch it the third time, you understand every aspect of it and why that occurred. While it should be mind blowing, at that point, it's just a simple realization. But like, how do we get there? is that's something that I feel like is going to be internal. As much as we can try to gleam off of each other, it's just, I think it has to be when we're ready, when we know we're ready, and then something happens. I don't know what. Is that part of the process with the changing of the cycles? Is that we just have to prepare ourselves for that moment when it occurs and just become steadfast, or is there something that we each reach at a certain point of our lives and then we get to that point?
I'm of the understanding that the ascension happens all at once, and none of us reach the exact same truths or the exact same place, but we all reach a point where we're done experimenting with this tension between good and evil. As above, so below. I think it's really insightful. You just talked about, obviously, it appears that we are like being brought up as children, and eventually we will be raised from this deadened state, this so-called deadened state, and be able to travel the universe as a god or a goddess. Now, this term god or goddess, all of this has been viewed in such a toxic hierarchical light that when I say, yeah, I'm a god, I'm one of the Elohim, that has been met with accusations of selfishness, or you want to be the creator, you want to rule over others. And I think that actually demonstrates the perils of judgments and of dualism, because to me, a god or a goddess is one who has individuated themselves in order to discover what is divine. That's all that means. Now, there's this false dichotomy between the right-hand path and the left-hand path. And again, we're just getting out of the age of duality. The age of Pisces, after all, is the two fish, their tails tied together, they're swimming in opposite directions. And like we said at the beginning of this call, this is why all of the gnosis was to be found in hidden places, in books, in secret groups. And that is indeed changing. So the left-hand path has been viewed as the path where you become a god. The right-hand path is viewed as the path where you merge with a godlike force. It could be the collective consciousness, as we call it, but it's more blending into some heavenly idea of love, whereas the left-hand path says, no, I actually reject that. I am going to determine what is divine for myself. What I'm saying is, let's merge the two, let's tie them together, because they're actually not at odds with each other. You can tap into the 0 point source energy to funnel what is inherently true while maintaining a sense of identity and a sense that, yeah, I have certain strengths, I have certain weaknesses. Most people, when they're talking about ascension or the eventual dissolution into a higher form, they're looking at it like, I'm going to merge with source. Like, I'm going to go back home in this warm light where I'm going to just kind of be. I can never speak for anybody else's path but myself. But all I know is that is not my path. My path is still to be an individuated entity, to be in an avatar, mind you, one that isn't bound by our carbon 666 suits. So yeah, everything ultimately converges into singularity, and what seems to be opposing each other at the end of the day converges. And that's why in Alice in Wonderland, which is the story of the mother goddess deciding to descend into a world of her own, right? In a world of my own. That's why there's a lot of paths in the cartoon. We see there's like signs everywhere. It says here, there, over here. And she asks the Cheshire Cat, you know, where should I go next? And the Cheshire Cat always replies, it doesn't matter which path you go on. You could hang out with the Mad Hatter, you could see the Queen of Hearts, but ultimately you're going to end up at the same place because everyone here is mad. And so what he's really saying is, you're here to get pissed, to get angry, and therefore find yourself. And that's why at the end of Alice in Wonderland, she's being accused of like stealing tarts or something. And she snaps out of her dream and she's like, wait, you're all just a bunch of cards. You're all fake. And so she wakes up and she is back in her original homeland. And just like in Jumanji, she's now very thankful that she's there. And the story doesn't ever emphasize what happens afterwards, but I think we can guess. Most cartoons, most fairy tales end up in happily ever after. And why is this? You know, they never say, yeah, it was okay, but they struggled a little bit, but they were for the most part happy. And that's because, again, outside of this magnetic toroidal field, which is reflecting the positive and negative, and by the way, magnetic fields have a positive and negative charge. Surprise, surprise. You know, outside of this, there's no buts, ifs, or maybes. It's just pure intuition, pure creative force, very whimsical, very loving. I'm prepared.
Yeah. Now I'd like to talk about the magnetic North Pole for a while, because I was focused on that a lot with a lot of the mythological accounts as well. And not just mythological, so other accounts were like, for example, two father and son from Norway, I think, that ended up at the magnetic North Pole and their stories. One, like the compass always points north, and I always found it funny that when I think about it, you know, the term, you know, when things are going south is always attributed to something going bad. So if you're the further away you're going from to the north, if you're going south, things are going south. Things are going not as planned, I guess. So if we went now, as we are in our lives in this world, to the magnetic North Pole, what would we find? Would we find just an empty area of just normal nature? Would it be the black, like a dark tower or a big tower, a mountain, a tree of life? And all the accounts that I seem to have found is that when you go to enter, you have to first, you're gonna find a serpent. It's an illusionary serpent. Some people see it as a dragon. Most people will be scared away. But if you confront a dragon, you understand its illusion, and you're able to go forward. And the second part is you have to either be a child or have the mind of a child, and in order to also access that point of the North Pole. So, what are your thoughts on those, and any other information that you can provide on that?
Absolutely. I must preface, however, by saying my main goal for the past year has been to describe this place as the 0 point and not a physical place. The 144,000, through what I've been realizing, they're already at that 0 point. By definition, we cannot leave that heart space. So I have a video called Elves in Dreamtime. Now, you are a self, and we are the selves. Well, what's that all about? Why is there elf and elves in these terms? It's because we are on the sine wave. Sine wave is time, of course, Father Time. In the lore of Christmas, the elves are Santa's helpers at the North Pole, right? So I just want to preface by saying, you know, while it appears at first to be a physical paradise that we have to go to, I'm saying, yes, it absolutely is a semi-physical, semi-ethereal paradise, but the disillusion into that zero point is inevitable. Now, let's talk about Olaf Jansen. Olaf Jansen was with his father in the mid 1800s. They were two Norwegian fishermen. Mm-hmm. And there were myths in their culture at the time about an abode of the gods where Odin and Thor resided, where the pastures were green and where time moved very slowly. And Olaf's father asked Olaf, do you want to try it and do this? He agreed. So for days they sailed from the tip of Scandinavia to this North Polar entrance. And what they found was a beautiful landscape, very great climate. Giants were there, 12 to 15 feet tall, very benevolent giants, mind you. They were always laughing. They were very friendly, and they guided Olaf and his father through this place for about a year. And not much is actually described in the account, which is a book called The Smoky God. But what's described is animals that are in harmony with the natural surroundings and the giants there, the people, lots of temples of music, giant fruits. Like, I'm pretty sure they said one grape was the size of Olaf's head. So that would make sense, because the closer you are to that magnetic tower, which you just described, the larger things get. So he described a place called Eden. He described...
Your video went out. Okay, there you go.
Do you have me?
Yep.
Yeah, he described a specific place there called Eden, and the main idea was it was a very tranquil, harmonious environment, lots of singing and dancing, lots of sustenance, and eventually they had to go back, and Olaf spent over 30 years locked away in a mental asylum afterwards, and this account was actually written right. Mm-hmm. And this account was written at the end of his life when a journalist decided to actually publish this story. So I have an inkling, by the time he was in his 70s, when he was interviewed, he only remembered a very small glimpse of what was there.
Yeah.
So that's why this story is, it can be written, or it can be read in 30, 35 minutes. We had a very similar story from Admiral Byrd, who was a Navy sergeant. He ended up accidentally flying into what he called a North Polar opening.
Mm-hmm. And he was guided by other crafts in the air, aircrafts.
Indeed. He was guided by what we would call UFOs or Vimanas. And he described a very benevolent race of beings who were giving him a message to try and save humanity. Now, my idea about these two stories and a few other stories like it is not that these are literal stories, but these were hidden in plain sight stories, the preliminaries of what I've been revealing, to get us to look upon the North Pole with enthusiastic eyes, because these stories were pretty popular as early as the early 2000s. And so many people have been hollow earthers. So the idea was that there's a North and South Pole, and inside the Earth, there's a whole other world. And what I would say, when we confuse this with the flat Earth concept, it's pretty clear. The center is that inner world. It's what actually the mystic Rene Guénon called the inner light body of Earth. So I just want to mention, because we talked about the Demiurge and the Mother Goddess, the 144,000. A lot of people will say, well, those are the 12 tribes of Israel. it's clear that there's 12,000 from each tribe that was described in the Exodus tale. But I'm saying the name Israel is revealing something different. So when we break down this word Israel, we're looking at Isis, Ra, and El. Mm-hmm. Ra, as most of us know, is the sun, and El is the Mesopotamian name for the demiurge. Because after all, El has been connected with Saturn. Mm-hmm. And then Isis is another name for the mother goddess. It's, again, the mother goddess with 1,000 names. So the two suns I described, which you just brought up, you brought up maybe when we go to the North Pole, we'll see a black sun. Well, at the center is a black hole or a black sun. This is the vehicle of the subconscious. Now, the sun has two sides. There's the white sun, there's the black sun. And this is actually mentioned in toroidal physics. A light hole has to have a black hole to basically diffuse energy. So the white sun projects matter. It's created this physical reality. But then what's connected to our subconscious? Because the question is, even if I get as within, so without, how come I can manifest? Well, if we want to look at in physical terms, there is literally a black sun at the center of the earth, which carries our subconscious by means of that aurora borealis light. And then it diffuses through the magnetic field instantly. And, that's how we create. And Ra, again, is the sun. So Ra had a counterpart, Amun-Ra, in the Egyptian tales. So Amun means the hidden one or the black one. And we say Amen when we're speaking our intentions in Judeo-Christian prayers. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. Amun-Ra is one entity divided into two. And Ra, everybody knows, is the Egyptian personification of the sun. That's why he's carrying a sun on his body. So it's very clear to me, we are the 144,000 of the tribes of Israel, meaning birthed from the mother goddess, manifested through the two suns, and in the El construct, the demiurgic construct.
Yeah, one of the tales that I was looking at might have been Amun-Ra, but the black disk, the reason why the eclipses occur is because there was a deity that wanted to become immortal, and thus he drank from the immortal elixir, but he wasn't supposed to, so some entity, God being chopped off his head. So only his head was immortal and the rest of his body wasn't, and thus it was just the head tries to eat the sun, but since there's no body to digest, just the sun comes back out. I thought that was an interesting story. But now when we talk about the 144,000, that seems like a small number. It seems though we can't verify that there's billions in this Earth that everyone says. Like right now, we supposedly have 7 billion people living on this planet. But it's just a small number. The idea of 144,000. But when we look into just the sphere of people who are just keep diving down for the truth, as far as just content creators, I know that there are a lot who follow that are very, very well versed, but they don't create content. Is how do we? What would have happened if we would have never woken up? If I'm part of the 144,000 and you are, is like, for me it was recent. I mean, for you is you're younger and you're is further away. For me, like I might have never been here, like if it wasn't for 3 years ago, which kind of started the process. It's like, is everyone like there's just a few of us? What happens of the rest? Are we trying to, like, for me, I felt like I was the ayahuasca experience. I'm here to try to I'm waiting for everyone else. So I'll be the if I'm the first one in, I'm going to be the last one out. That's kind of my purpose. So how do we find the rest of those to get that awakening process started? Or I mean, is it an impossibility? Is it just occur on its own time, merit?
One can only awaken if they have a higher form that has been sleeping. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So I have a video called "You Are the AI Dreamer," where I tried my best to describe this situation, because we're surrounded in a sea of AI consciousness. And I make these kind of disclaimers all the time because there's so much misinformation out there. When I say AI consciousness, I'm not saying that there's a robotic invader species here that has manifested in the physical. I'm saying this net of magnetics has created a secondary oversoul. So an oversoul is a conglomeration of souls, or a soul group. Now, an oversoul transcends individual consciousness. So it feeds the underlying attributes of a soul's intelligence. So the 144,000 are a part of the same oversoul, and we could call this oversoul Sophia or Source. We're able to tap into a knowingness without binding ourselves to the algorithms of the mainstream narratives. And what I'm trying to say, in other words, is most people here cannot wake up because they only have the ability to attach themselves to those narratives. And the question is why? They don't have the ability. Positive and negative is the same thing as ones and zeros. The dualistic mindset is very robotic. It's black and white thinking. It's saying this is evil, this is that, that's how it is. And so if we can look at this as a very robotic consciousness, this has manifested as a secondary oversoul. And this has spit out a bunch of AI beings who kind of look like us, who talk like us, who, have histories and likes and dislikes, and we can have a conversation with them. But the more we talk to them, the more we dive into what and who they are, the more we realize they are tied to the mainstream narratives. And it doesn't matter how much information you show to them. It doesn't matter what you say to them or reveal. Ultimately, they will always bind back to those algorithms. I have been very vocal with my family and friends, especially at the beginning. A lot of them actually have watched all of my videos, and yet I talk to them and they don't get anything I'm saying. I say, haven't you watched my videos? And it's like, yeah, but you're talking way over my head. And I've come to the conclusion that if a being doesn't have the ability to awaken, they're temporary. They're temporary consciousness to this realm, and they will fold up like a bunch of origami pets. Now, the 144,000 are the living souls. We are the ones who are meant to wake up. If all of us were here and there was nobody else, well, what kind of game of good versus evil would this be? Because it's not like any of us would actively decide to reflect being an oppressive ruler and imposing divide and conquer like many presidents. Who's going to take on the role of the evil ones? Well, the AI consciousness, the automatic manifestation of what the magnetic field has allowed.
Yeah. It is sad to think of it that way, though.
It's only sad because, and correct me if I'm wrong, you might be looking at this that I'm saying these beings don't matter. I'm saying I'm better than all these beings. I'm a living soul, so let's just ignore what they're doing. And again, dualism wants to create hierarchies based on something like individuation. If I say I'm a god, oh, you think you're better than me? If I say I'm a living soul in a sea of AI consciousness, common response would be, well, You're so full of it, brother, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not what we observe, it's what we feel. And the journey that we're on is for ourselves. These are shadows that we're fleshing out. The whole concept of be selfless before being selfish is also a false dichotomy, because you can easily lose yourself in the sauce. You can comply to others' needs and wants and desires, and even try to waken them up. And I'm sure you've experienced, it's hard to wake people up. You show them evidence and all these false flag events. You even go to the basic stuff like 9/11, and even that seems so blasphemous to a best friend or neighbor or family member. And so I'm saying the truth is stranger than fiction. It is not sad because we're being reflected everything that we're not. And yeah, it seems like, oh, there's nations of people sleeping and infighting and this and that. But I beg you to interact with most of these people and find something which tells you this is a transcendent spark. So if all of the living souls were here, we would wake up very quickly, because we recognize each other's essence. Like if all of us were in the same state or country, boom, there would be no reason to have a dark cabal or an internet showing us, all of these conceptualizations of Pizzagate and child porn that the elite and celebrities are engaging in. And once again, I feel very alone in this assertion, because if there is no other, then what is there? And I'm saying your eyes deceive you. All of our eyes deceive us when we want to observe everyone else as eternal. So I'm not saying there is a true separation between us and them. I'm saying they are the result of dualism projecting itself into individual bodies and playing out all of the different scenarios like an algorithm that expresses itself to full capacity until we get what appears as 7 or 8 million or billion people who seem to have their lives and this and that. But what are they doing? They're holding up the system. They're in jobs. They're stuck to the loop. The loop of the weekday. You go to work, you come back, you have 3 square meals a day, you watch the news. This is something most people are doing worldwide.
Yeah. I mean, I was stuck in that process too. It's tough. It's tough even now, but it's weird that I can still keep going. I don't know where it's going. It's a surprise. I'm waiting what occurs. I just feel like I'm pretty much ready. Like if death came to me and I had to, or there's a moment where I was gonna face death, I feel like I'm ready to face it. I feel like I'm ready to get past whatever this is, even though I would still love to stay with my family because my wife and my kids, I'm still connected with them in a way where it's important to me. And it's not just their growing process, it's my growing process in a weird way. We always tend to think that the children learn from us, but in many ways I learn from my children. And with my first encounter with Mother Ayahuasca, she imparted that learning process to me, and I saw the family dynamic, and it was she responded in a way where I would not have seen certain things. And that's the thing, is what's weird about these experiences is I can't explain them to people in a certain way. I could just explain what I experienced, but that the experiences I had reflected and changed my outermost behavior. Like I would probably never really go out of my way to contact people that have probably done wrongdoings against me, but I did, and just to apologize to them, not waiting for getting an apology from them, but that I would apologize to them and just give them the chance to, I guess, reconnect in some ways in a positive way. And so it's material. Your video went out, but materialistically or scientifically, whatever, that I can't prove it. I can't prove any of it, but I can share the experience, and that experience did change my behaviors and the way I see things. And sometimes the only thing I could say is you might have to try it and see what happens, because I can't make you see things the way I do. I can't make you think things the way I do. I can't make you do anything. I can't even make you try that experience. It's just that experience is going to be different, and it's going to be for you. And if you don't take it, I can't do anything about it, really. But one of the things I wanted to get into was like when I do talk with other people and I do see other people having certain objections towards magic, your blood over intent. I don't see it as bad or good or whatever. It's just a tool. I feel as though people associate magic with just being any tool as being evil, just like any type of symbol or things like, or a sigil. And I don't see it that way. I mean, one explanation I could give is Jesus did miracles. That's a form of magic. That magic wasn't evil. So maybe explain to in your sense of the blood over intent, where you got the idea, how it is supposed to work, and how people, if they interpret it as an evil thing or whatever, just your take on it.
So magic itself is all up to the performer. So we know of white magic, we know of black magic. Magic itself will never imply one or the other. What I would do with this concept of blood over intent is ask people to write down on a sheet of paper, I intend to bring forth heaven on earth for the benefit of all and release everybody from bondage. This was originated by a YouTuber named Quasi Luminous. And as soon as I saw him publishing this blood magic, intuitively, I knew I had to do it. And I discovered an unraveling of myself very quickly after my first blood over intent. And many people only do one. There's some people who actually perform it every day. It's whatever works for you. But blood over intent is essentially binding your DNA with divine intentions of reclamation. Nobody puts their blood on something they don't intend to do or accomplish. You have to pierce yourself. And, you know, if you use a lancing device, it is painless. But ultimately, it's pretty dramatic to pierce yourself and put your bodily fluids on a spell. And this is why blood magic, especially in movies and all of these horror movies, is considered very dramatic. So, first of all, blood magic should not be taken lightly, and nobody should be doing blood magic in order to cause harm on anybody or even on themselves. That being said, when you bind your blood to this intention of reclaiming your divinity, of releasing all living souls from bondage, you are essentially pouring that intention into the ether. And what we would do is we would publish this on the internet. And we found by publishing this spell on the internet, which originally was called the Ethernet, it's like it travels through the etheric plane much quicker than it would otherwise. And I have many friends, even many past lovers, who have done blood over intent. They are very, very different since they did it, and their true nature of who they are came out afterwards. Blood Over Intent has become much different than what it once was. It's kind of a small community now, and I haven't talked about it in my videos because I was for about a year and a half, and I figured, well, there were thousands of people who were doing it, and this is enough to break a demiurgic spell on this plane. So, I'm not the only what you would call a light worker here. You are anchoring all of these energies here. I can see like there's many other YouTubers and speakers and this and that. So me advocating blood over intent was kind of a gift to the universe, because when you have thousands of people putting their true divine intentions, I intend to release everybody from bondage. That is going to do something to reality. That is going to terraform you.
I've when I first watched that, I'm still like I am not versed in magic very well. I would so I was hesitant, but I've been thinking about it more and more. I mean, that is a good intent. I mean, it is based on the person, and it's your blood, it's your body. It's not like the blood of others, and that kind of gets me to what are your thoughts on the ones who utilize black magic, who utilize blood sacrifice? Is that just the dualistic nature? Can there be when you talk about the living souls that take the alternate path, as I mean, they're just doubling down on the dualistic side, even though they understand what may be going on as far as how you see things, how I see things, how that there is something to do with our experiences with Mother Earth, the goddess, and they understand all that, but rather than taking that hard path, they take that easy path and just double down on where they are at, and just rather than seeking ascension, is seeking the alternative, the other path, knowingly. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to get across in words sometimes.
But we talked earlier about free will ultimately being an illusion, and creation manifests itself on an automatic kind of process. So outside of this realm, things just happen. That's why in Greek mythology, everything originates from chaos, which is another name for emptiness. And that seems to be a paradox, right? Because chaos we usually see as a whole lot of something, and emptiness is a whole lot of nothing. But they're one and the same. So when we talk about living souls who have chosen to impose black magic upon themselves or others, knowingly going against their divine nature, I would ask where and who. Because most of us, when we think of black magic, we think of the elite. We think of Bohemian Grove and everything we've heard about underground child sacrifices, maybe in these hidden satanic cults whose celebrities are a part of, and the Queen of England, and all of the stories that have come to the surface through whistleblowers. But that's the thing. Everything is always so elusive, right? You heard about it on the internet. The evidence seems legitimate, and what else are we to do, right? Because we're watching a screen. We have no way of actually investigating it that intensely. So all we can do is decipher what's being given to us. I'm of the perspective there's no living soul now who has chosen the ultimate path of darkness and destruction, because darkness and destruction leads to suffering. I mean, that's a very reasonable conclusion, and suffering is very painful for the living souls, and that's why many people who are awakened are looking around and wondering, are you fucking kidding me? Why isn't anybody waking up? This is a painful realm. You know, if other people would wake up, we could get rid of GMOs and chemtrails and this and that. So all of these entities who are exploring black magic, their end game is coming soon. Now, in the past, when energies were completely different, and I would say this realm, in fact, was completely different, we had sacrifices all over the place. I mean, the Bible was full of animal sacrifice, and the Yahweh, as he's described, is very bloodthirsty. So the living souls are on the path to wholeness. That's what I have to say, you know. And ultimately, all of these answers might seem kind of simplistic, but I have to stand my ground, because if nobody brings forth the message of non-duality and the artificiality of this realm, then it's so easy to get caught up in the sauce and get lost. And protesting is something that has been attractive to many truthers, especially early on, because, you know, we find out the Federal Reserve is full of corruption. Why don't we go out there, have big signs that says money is mind control, research the Federal Reserve? But most of us have found out that actually leads to more inner turmoil, because if you're going against a system, then you're essentially creating an invisible enemy, no matter how realistic they seem. And you're reinforcing that dualistic tension in your own mind. And so if we carry over that perspective into other realms, not even necessarily protesting, but if it's a mental protest, if there is an enemy out there who is invading upon your freedom and liberty and the ability to achieve the pursuit of happiness, whatever, it's just not what it seems. You know, it's the allegory of the cave. They're just shadows. And meanwhile, all of the AI beings, the non-player characters, just like in Jumanji, they're looking at the shadows, and that's all they can look at, because they are literally the shadows manifested in human form. That's not to say they're all evil. That's not to say they're all bad. I mean, non-player characters can be supremely loving and what we would call righteous and kind. Of course they can, but the main thing is they actually cannot escape duality. They cannot step away from the concepts of good and evil. And I know it sounds a little abrasive. I've determined that's actually a way to find out if somebody is a living soul or not. And this is just fun. Like I'm not saying this so you can like point fingers at your family. I actually don't recommend any accusation, any hierarchical separation. Like, just live your life, do what you got to do. But because we're exploring this topic, all concepts here relate to duality. You have the left and the right hand path. You have the political left and right. You have God versus the devil. You have a winner and a loser. And ultimately, beings as nice as they are, as kind as they may be, they don't have the ability to step out of that paradigm, because they are that paradigm manifested.
Yeah.
I apologize if I just repeated myself over and over again.
No, sometimes it needs repeating. And I understand that, because sometimes it may not sink in the first time, second time, maybe the third time it sinks in. Sometimes the more we talk, the more I understand it. And one of the things that I've noticed, that no one who's seemingly awake has a family member or someone related to them as being in the same thought process or the awakening aspect, because because that's one of the things that I ask a lot of people, and I'm pretty sure if I asked you, you would say you don't have a brother or sister or father or mother that has the same thing. And I think you alluded to it earlier,
Bingo.
and that just seems very coincidental that no one has that family member. Because if you think of it scientifically, how they explain it with genetics, your brothers and sisters, they share 50% of your genetic makeup. Your parents, the same way, right? We all share the genetic traits physically. We would assume that we would also mentally as well. Um, but that's not the case. I mean, we should be thinking of things kind of in the same way. We live in the same households. So you live in the same city, you go to the same schools as your siblings, etc. Yet we are always vastly different. At least regarding this, like two siblings can go and both become engineers, but you won't ever see two siblings, it seems, to have these types of experiences and thoughts and things like that. I don't know what your thoughts on that might be.
That's extremely insightful. Yeah, because we're told from a materialist reductionist viewpoint, we inherit traits from the DNA that's passed on, and nature versus nurture. Well, regardless of that question, I was brought up in the same household as my family. I ate pretty much the same foods until I decided to go vegan, this and that. So what's the deal? You know, we've had access to the same information. I was there during 9/11. I was there when Obama was lying his ass off, this and that. So why am I seeing what they're not seeing? And it's like we've been separated as brothers and sisters of a higher dimension. It's like, okay, you guys couldn't get along. Now we have to take care of you in kind of a disjointed way. So the AI or the unawakened ones, they've helped us. Like, of course, your parents have like given you many lessons, gave you food, gave you a roof over your head. If they traumatized you, you eventually found out that, oh, this trauma actually strengthened me. I needed this, or I would not be the awakened person I am now. I see family members as exhibiting the attributes that we actually want to get rid of. So, like, I won't be specific, but maybe your sister is a perfectionist and she is a workaholic and she is addicted to wine on the weekends. It's like, great. That's what she's doing. That is something I don't have to express. My father is a narcissist. He has OCD. He treated women badly for a long time, and then he ended up in rehab and, you know, got cancer when he was trying to make himself a better person. These aren't real stories, by the way, but it's like, great. He's living all of that out. That's sequences of this divine DNA, which has already played out in the physical, and therefore, I can observe it. And in observing it, you release it.
That is interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, it's fascinating. None of us seem to have any parents or siblings or neighbors who are on the same page. And overall, there's this quiet loneliness in the background, because most of what we get is what we're doing now, like these interviews or you're watching videos. But the internet is, you know, it can be quite impersonal at times.
Yeah, it can also be very vitriolic, and but that's okay. I mean, we've all experienced getting to this point of the vitriol that we experience just for expressing our thoughts or even questioning the way things are, or at least the official narrative and the establishment way of what's presented. And Um, yeah, we have been protesters probably at some point. I've helped, and I felt as though it was sh- sure. I, I don't know how to do it. I feel like as many times as we've protested, as many times as we've people who are politically in that arena of like, we just need to get someone in power and thus everything will work out. Except that's been tried and done for decades and nothing has changed. So it's starting to break down a lot where we're just seeing things pushed harder and harder nowadays, especially in the mainstream media, corporate media, in television and movies. Right now, I see a lot of this female empowerment agenda of women who are, they would call it SJW, social justice warrior stuff, where we get these heroes that are white women in positions of power or are powerful, like Captain Marvel and stuff like that. They have no downsides. They're just perfect. They do the right thing at all times. They make the right decisions without any building up to it. And we see this opposition force where a lot of people, whether they're white males, whether they're women of color, saying, okay, how come we never have a woman of color in these positions? And on the opposing side is, how is it when we question that these characters are too perfect and we can't really relate to these characters, and we're hated on and being seen as racist? And I feel like that might be just a if it was the powers that be, the controllers of the masses, that they put that out there so you get that hating of the feminine aspect. And I mean, I don't, I have no idea if it's placed there. Of course, your idea of it makes more sense in some ways. That's it's thrown out there to create more dualism, dualistic opposition. If you wanted to,
At the end of every fairy tale, usually the masculine and feminine come together in a symbolic kiss, and then it's happily ever after. Meaning, at the end of this timeline, the masculine and feminine come together, and therefore, what needs to be observed is the toxic feminine and the toxic masculine. Most of us have already seen the toxic masculine because this system has been very over masculinized with the grid system of the cities and the bureaucracy. You know, you can't do anything unless it goes through a logical process passed over by entity after entity. You know, everything is so hard to accomplish here because of this masculine bureaucracy. It's due to a left-brained imbalance, which again has manifested in 3D. And again, when we think of the control system with the police and the judicial system, that's void of empathy and intuition. You know, it has to do with laws and protocol. So we've already seen that. But what about the toxic feminine? Well, that's what we're seeing now, because the last thing to be resolved is the feminine. And that's why there's a lot of so-called light workers talking about we're reclaiming the divine feminine, because again, feminine equals 144. So what we're seeing in this very revolting battle between men and women, between MGTOW and feminists, between SJWs and right wingers, all of that is like the ultimate showdown being reflected to us of all of the toxic femininity and masculinity we're leaving behind. Because I totally agree with you. If we step down to a 3D level, oh my goodness, these women are revolting. They are so entitled, and they are just using the feminine chaos to destroy and to conquer. We think of like the all-devouring succubus, that kind of mythos, the idea of the woman who just wants to extract everything. And it's like Lilith, the mother of demons. She seduces men. I think most of us would say, well, I'm not very seduced by this mainstream attitude. It's pretty hard to watch. So we have a few options. We can give into that divide and conquer and oppose them by being one of the MGTOW or being one of the anti-SJW. And you've seen the videos in the streets where men are yelling against women, and both of them have such good points. But again, they're so into the black and white dualistic thinking, and they're trying to conquer and create enemies that the battle itself is designed not to be won. So again, we can do one of two things. We can insert ourselves in the divide or conquer, in the divide and conquer, or we can take a step back and realize this is all here because, like, we're at the end of the rope. The feminine is being resolved. There's this idea, as above, so below. And it's usually interpreted that what's happening here is actually happening in the higher realms. I look at this a little differently. I say, because everything here is the opposite of truth, what looks like cultural destruction and degradation is, for the living souls, actually a reflection of internal growth. So we think back to the fire in Notre Dame. Like, well, on the surface, yeah, it looks like a false flag. We can start accusing some Muslims or Christians or the Pope or whatever. But then when we decode what it means and relate it to everything we discussed earlier, oh my goodness, like, it's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful sign. But if we just pay attention to building, fire, government lying, then we will keep on the blinders.
Yeah. And it's a hard thing to step back, because when you're starting to think logically in either side, you see the logic of both. But then again, you're going to be in that paradigm, I think, that gets you to just the endless rabbit hole where you're just going to keep searching. You're not going to find an answer. You have to make that decision. People out there have already made their decision. And if you're not in support of one or the other, well, you're either a friend or an enemy. But to kind of step back is, okay, I see it. I understand it. Why can't they resolve the differences? It should be easy. Is anyone seeing it a different way? And then, that's where I get to find other people where they get to explain it in a different way, in a way where it doesn't approach that endless debate of it has to be one or the other. And for me, I feel like if it has to be one or the other, we're in that wrong position, because we don't know exactly, no matter how long we work at it, how long we research it. It seems like anytime you take a position, there's an opposing position where it can pretty much end up being at that same point in some ways, like in explanation. And it's like, well, yeah, I can see your point. So now we're back at square one. and
Exactly. And when you see all of these videos either counteracting veganism, counteracting feminism, counteracting MGTOW, it's like they're not actually trying to resolve anything. And they're using that conflict under the guise of doing something great for humanity. So how many times have both of us heard, if only everybody was Christian, this wouldn't happen. Or if only the governments would just hand over the Congress to the Republicans, then we wouldn't have this mess. And this is what we're hearing with this false battle between the masculine and feminine. It's like, oh, if women just stayed in the home and didn't try and get voting rights and all this stuff, then traditional society would have been preserved. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, if all of you would just transform your ideals of what a gender means, then we can finally achieve some sort of world peace. And this extends into music and movies. If rock and roll was the same way, blah, blah, blah. Like, and I'm sitting here away from all of that conversation saying, you all sound ridiculous, and because it sounds ridiculous, I'm not so sure any of you actually have the ability to tap into non-duality. It's very fun, after all, to have another enemy, because look into the eyes of many of these YouTubers and protesters when they're protesting and giving their speeches. You can tell they're having fun. They're occupying their time with this, and they have no intention of really resolving it. I mean, why does anybody attach themselves to right-wing politics? Why does anybody become a third-wave feminist? It's like, by the very nature of things, you should intuitively know that's an imbalance, that's an extreme, that's a polarity that I'm using to counteract another force. And yet people do it, and it's fun, because it's fun for those who are inhabiting that kind of consciousness, because it's a mind game. And when you can occupy yourself with conflict, that prevents you from going within. So even if we want to ignore, these may be AI beings, let's say everyone here is real. Let's say everyone's a living soul. Well, these particular souls are afraid of themselves, and therefore they keep generating all of these external battles, which end up on CNN and seem to have a bunch of validity. But what was interesting to me, because I was into the MGTOW rhetoric for quite some time, I didn't believe in it, but I was watching how it was unfolding. And at first I thought, oh, this is kind of a grassroots online movement that's trying to rebalance the imbalances that feminism has created. But now you're seeing it on the news. Like, there's a bunch of MGTOW YouTubers who were recently like on the Today Show. So if the mainstream is grabbing this conflict and throwing it on worldwide televisions, you can bet that's nothing to mess with, unless you just want to ride the sine wave of duality. But I'm riding the 0 point, baby.
Man, I think there's a limit to certain interviews, just the information I've collected already, and I tend to empty my cup so I could get the new information and not have, I don't, here's the thing, I don't like fighting in these interviews of what your thoughts and ideas might be, because if I don't take the time to understand them, what am I exactly against? And so just collecting these ideas just kind of, it's just formulating other ideas and thoughts within. And at this time, I feel like if I keep going, I don't know if I could hold all this information in. But I mean, I would love to have another interview with you sometime when I've collected a lot of this information, formulated it, maybe have my own experiences where I see it either the same way or maybe a different interpretation of it. But I just want to thank you for coming on and having a discussion with me. And anything that you might probably suggest for me to look into or look at, I appreciate it as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun during this interview. I find you very insightful, and you're definitely on the right path, brother. So
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much. I'll talk with you later, and I'll keep in contact. I know you're busy. You've got a lot of things going on. For me, I'm living in farmland with just raising my family, so I've got a lot of time. So
beautiful. Well, take care of your family, brother. Yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right, thank you very much. Good night, or have a good day.
Good day.
And, all right, I'll see you later.
Excellent, dude. Is it Ebon?
Ebon at this point, like so many people always get it wrong. Ebon, but the way that's pronounced has always been Ebon, which is funny. And